Leila Anwar was not an ordinary woman. At 29, she had already made a name for herself as one of the few journalists brave enough to uncover the truth in dangerous places. She worked for an independent newspaper in Ankara and had spent years reporting on corruption, war crimes, and missing people. But when she received a mysterious message from a soldier who wanted to expose a secret detention camp, she knew this story was different. It was bigger, riskier, and far more dangerous than anything she had done before. The message was short. It said, "They're keeping people where no one can find them. Not even the Red Cross knows. I can prove it." Attached was a blurry image showing a man in a military uniform standing in front of a concrete building, somewhere in a desert. There was no name, no coordinates, just a feeling. The kind that made her heart beat faster. Leila had followed enough leads to know that when people talk about black sites, they mean secret prisons where rules don't exist. She told her editor about the message. He looked worried and said, "Leila, if this is real, you're walking into a storm. These people don't play by the law." But she just smiled and replied, "If I don't go, who will?" That was her spirit, bold, restless, always chasing truth even when it hid in the darkest corners. A few days later, she packed her small camera, a voice recorder, her notebook, and a bracelet her mother had given her. Inside the bracelet, she hid a microchip, a tiny device that could store hundreds of files. She planned to save every piece of evidence there. Leila traveled to the border, pretending to be a humanitarian worker. The roads were rough and checkpoints were everywhere. She had to speak carefully, act innocent, and never let her eyes show fear. By the third day, she reached a small village near the desert. Her contact, a nervous young man in uniform, met her behind an old warehouse. He told her in a shaky voice that the Blacksite was about 20 kilometers away, hidden underground. "No one comes back from there," he whispered. "If they catch you, no one will even know where you are." Leila nodded, her heart pounding. She recorded his words, thanked him, and promised that the world would know the truth. That night, she sent her editor a message. "Found the location. If you don't hear from me in 48 hours, release my notes." It was the last message anyone ever received from her. 2 days later, her phone went dead. Her GPS tracker stopped moving in the middle of the desert. Her editor tried calling, emailing, even reaching out to local fixers, but nothing. It was as if she had vanished from the face of the earth. Some believed she had been kidnapped. Others thought she might have crossed into another country to escape. But deep down, everyone who knew her feared the same thing, that she had found the Blacksite, and the people inside had made sure she'd never speak again. Meanwhile, in a quiet government office, a group of men watched footage from a security drone. The video showed a woman walking through the desert alone, her scarf fluttering in the wind. "That's her," one of them said. "The journalist." Orders were given, and within hours, a military truck was sent to intercept her. She never saw it coming. When Leila opened her eyes again, the world was dark and silent. Her wrists were tied, her head pounding. The smell of metal and dust filled the air. Somewhere above, a light flickered, and she heard footsteps. A door opened, and a cold voice said, "Welcome to Division 9. She didn't know where she was or how long she'd been unconscious. But as she listened to the heavy door lock behind her, one thing became clear. She had found the Blacksite. The place no one was supposed to know existed. They thought she was just another naive reporter. They laughed at her accent, her small frame, her trembling hands. But what they didn't see was the fire in her eyes, the same fire that had brought her here. Leila knew that somewhere inside this place lay the truth she came to find. And no matter how dark it was, she was determined to bring that truth back to the world. In that moment, trapped in a cell with nothing but fear and silence, Leila made a silent promise to herself. They may have caught me, but they haven't won. She didn't know it yet, but her story, the story of a woman who refused to be broken, was only just beginning. When Leila opened her eyes, everything felt heavy. Her body, her thoughts, even the air. The room was small and gray, made of cold concrete walls that seemed to swallow all sound. There were no windows, no sunlight, just a single dim bulb that buzzed above her head. She didn't know where she was, but the silence told her everything she needed to know. This was the Blacksite, the secret place she had been looking for. Her wrists were tied, her clothes dusty, and her throat dry. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. Suddenly, the door opened with a loud metallic sound. Two men in military uniforms stepped inside. One of them looked at her and smirked. "So this is the brave reporter, huh?" They laughed as if she were a joke. The other man kicked her small bag toward her and said, "No phones, no cameras, no hero stories here. You talk only when we ask." Leila didn't reply. She stared at the floor, trying to hide her fear. But deep down, she was observing everything. The uniforms, the language, even the smell of oil and metal. Every detail could be important later. When they left, she quietly tested her bracelet. It was still there. Inside that silver band was a microchip, the only proof she had that this Blacksite existed. Days passed, though time was hard to measure in a place with no light. They fed her twice a day, sometimes skipped meals to test her patience. The guards laughed and joked about her, calling her the journalist who thought she was a spy. They said she would never leave this place. But Leila didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. She kept her mind sharp. Every sound, every footstep outside her door, she memorized it. One night, she heard someone crying in the next cell. A man's voice, weak and trembling. He whispered in a language she recognized. She tapped softly on the wall. After a moment, he tapped back. That was how it started, small, secret communication between prisoners. She learned that there were many others like her. People who had simply asked too many questions or refused to stay silent. Some were aid workers, some soldiers, some just ordinary villagers who knew the wrong secret. The guards thought she was harmless. To them, she was just another scared woman who didn't understand how serious this place was. That mistake gave her space. During interrogations, she pretended to be confused, nervous, and weak. The soldiers laughed, thinking she had broken easily. But behind her calm face, she was studying them. Their routines, their badges, and the way they followed orders. One morning, she was brought into a larger room, the first time she had seen more than four walls. There were cameras in every corner and a chair in the middle. A tall man with sharp eyes entered. His uniform was cleaner, his tone colder. "I am Commander Rashid," he said. "You're lucky to be here. Most people who come through this building don't make it past the first day." Leila met his gaze. He smiled faintly, as if enjoying the power. "You want to find the truth?" he asked. "Here it is, you're nothing. No one knows you're here. No one is coming for you." He waited for her to react, but she stayed silent. That silence annoyed him. "Mock me if you want," he said, leaning closer. "But in the end, you'll tell me everything." Then he turned and left. The guards laughed as they dragged her back to her cell. That night, Leila lay awake, her mind spinning. Now she knew who was in charge, Commander Rashid. And from the way he spoke, she could tell he had something to hide. People like him always did. His arrogance was her clue. He was too confident, too sure that no one could touch him. That meant there was truth buried somewhere here, and she was getting closer to it. Over the next few days, she began to earn the quiet trust of the other prisoners. She listened more than she talked, asking gentle questions when guards weren't around. Slowly, stories began to emerge about missing documents, strange shipments at night, and a list of names that no one was supposed to see. Every night, she whispered those details to herself, committing them to memory. Leila also began to notice patterns. Which guards were cruel, which ones hesitated. One young medic in particular seemed different. He didn't laugh when others mocked her. Once, he left her water when he wasn't supposed to. Leila said only one word to him, "Please." He didn't answer, but his eyes told her he understood. She realized something important. Even inside this dark, cruel place, there were cracks in the system. And through those cracks, light could enter. Leila wasn't just surviving anymore. She was observing, learning, and waiting. They thought she was broken, but she was planning her next move. The guards laughed at her, the commander dismissed her, But none of them knew that the woman in cell number 12 still had her secret microchip. And when the time came, that small hidden device would reveal everything they were trying to hide. Inside the walls of the Blacksite, surrounded by silence and cruelty, Leila began to understand the truth. Sometimes, the most dangerous weapon isn't a gun or a soldier. It's the courage to remember and the will to expose a lie, no matter the cost. Commander Rashid was a man who believed he could never be defeated. He had power, money, and complete control over the Blacksite, a secret prison hidden far away from the world. No one dared to question him. The soldiers feared him, the officers obeyed him, and the prisoners trembled at the sound of his voice. To everyone, he was a ghost, a man who existed only in whispers. But to Leila Anwar, he was the key to everything. Every time Rashid entered the room, the air changed. His presence was cold and heavy, like the silence before a storm. He was tall, sharp-faced, and always calm. He spoke softly, but his words carried threat. When he looked at Leila, he didn't see a journalist. He saw a problem to be erased. To him, she was just another prisoner who would eventually break. One morning, 2 guards dragged Leila into the interrogation room again. Rashid was already there, sitting behind a steel table. A file lay open in front of him, her reports, her travels, her articles. "You've been busy," he said, flipping through the pages. "You think you can expose secrets that are above your pay grade?" His tone was mocking, almost playful. Leila didn't answer. Rashid stood up and walked around her slowly, like a predator circling its prey. "You know what I hate the most?" he said quietly. "Journalists who think they're heroes. You come here, thinking you'll uncover the truth. But the truth doesn't exist here. Only orders." He stopped behind her chair. "And you, Miss Anwar, will learn to follow them." He signaled to the guards. One of them poured water on the floor. The other turned up the bright interrogation light. But Rashid didn't shout or threaten. He just smiled. "Fear is a tool," he said, almost as if he were teaching a lesson. "When you control fear, you control people." Then he leaned closer and whispered, "But you're too stubborn. Let's see how long that lasts." For the next few days, the guards made sure Leila understood what life was like under Commander Rashid. They mocked her, called her the lost reporter, and laughed at her attempts to talk to other prisoners. But what they didn't notice was that Rashid's arrogance was giving her an advantage. He believed she was harmless, that she was too weak to cause trouble. That mistake would soon cost him. Leila began to study him quietly. She noticed that every time he visited the cells, the guards behaved differently, nervous, overly polite. He didn't just run the Blacksite. He ruled it like his personal kingdom. He had connections outside too. Once, she overheard him on the phone, saying, "Yes, the shipment will leave tonight. Tell them it's classified under Division 9. That name, Division 9, stayed in her mind. She didn't know what it meant, but it sounded important. Sometimes Rashid would visit her cell alone, pretending to check on her progress. "You're a curious woman," he said once, "still trying to make sense of things. Do you think the world cares about people like you? No one will remember your name." But his calm voice couldn't hide the unease in his eyes. Deep down, he knew she was different from the others. She didn't break. She didn't beg. She was watching, and he could feel it. What Rashid didn't know was that Leila had found small ways to collect information. One of the guards, a young man who pitied her, had started talking when he was bored. He didn't reveal much, but every word mattered. From him, she learned that Rashid had been running secret operations, selling prisoner data, moving people for money, and hiding evidence of illegal deals. Leila realized she was sitting inside the heart of the very corruption she had tried to expose. Every night, she repeated the details to herself, names, dates, places. She couldn't write them down, but she could remember them. Her mind became her notebook. When the lights went out, she would whisper to herself, "Division 9, Rashid payment records, missing soldiers." Slowly, the puzzle began to take shape. The other prisoners started to notice her calmness. "Why do you look so sure?" one of them whispered through the wall. Leila replied softly, "Because monsters always leave footprints." That small sentence gave others hope. For the first time, the prisoners felt that maybe someone among them could make a difference. One day, Rashid ordered all the prisoners to be gathered in the courtyard. A rare event. He stood on a small platform and gave a speech about discipline and loyalty. He spoke like a man confident in his power. But Leila watched his eyes and saw something else, fear. A man who truly believed in his control didn't need to remind everyone of it. That night, as the guards dragged her back to her cell, she whispered under her breath, "You're hiding something, Commander, and I'll find it." The laughter of the soldiers echoed through the corridor, but Leila didn't care. She had seen enough to know that the commander's empire was built on lies, and lies always crumble when the truth begins to rise. Days slowly turned into weeks, and Leila began to understand the rhythm of life inside the Blacksite. Every sound, every movement, every face became familiar. The guards thought she was weak, broken, harmless, and that was exactly what she wanted them to think. In truth, Leila was quietly building something inside those gray walls. A network of whispers, trust, and hidden courage. It started one evening when she was cleaning her small metal tray after dinner. The guard who usually watched her was distracted, talking to another soldier outside the cell. From the next room, she heard a soft cough, the same one she had heard several nights before. She decided to take a risk. She tapped 3 times on the wall. After a few seconds, someone tapped back. That was how she met Yusuf, a former soldier who had been imprisoned for refusing to follow an order he called inhuman. At first, their conversations were simple. Just short signals through the wall, a word or two exchanged during meal delivery. But soon they began to share more. Yusuf told her about how prisoners were being moved out at night, loaded into trucks that never came back. He said Rashid called it special transfers. No one knew where those people went. Leila listened carefully, asking small questions, always cautious. She knew that every word could be overheard, every whisper could be punished. But Yusuf trusted her. "You're not like the others," he said one day softly. "You're still thinking like someone free." Leila's curiosity only grew stronger. She began paying attention to the small details, which guards had access to which areas when the trucks arrived, and how the surveillance cameras moved. She noticed that the same 3 guards always accompanied the night shipments. They wore black armbands marked with the symbol D9, the same thing Rashid had mentioned once during his call. That night, she whispered to Yusuf, "Division 9. It's more than a unit. It's a business." Yusuf didn't understand at first, so she explained, "They're selling people. That's why no one returns." The realization made his voice shake with anger. "They're selling human beings?" he said. Leila nodded slowly. "And Rashid is at the center of it." Over the next few days, Leila began to connect with more prisoners. There was Mira, an aid worker who had been accused of espionage, and Tariq, a young man who had worked in the communications office before being thrown in for asking the wrong question. They all had small pieces of information, fragments of a bigger truth. Together, they began to put the puzzle together. Mira knew about the false medical reports, how death certificates were faked so families thought their loved ones had died in combat. Tariq remembered seeing documents labeled with foreign company logos. And Yusuf once overheard a guard bragging that one prisoner's name is worth more than gold. Leila started writing everything in her mind, memorizing each fact. She had no paper, no pen, but her mind was sharper than any notebook. Every night, she whispered the details into her bracelet, pretending to pray. The bracelet's microchip quietly recorded her voice. She knew that one day, those recordings would expose the truth to the world. Still, danger was everywhere. One evening, a new prisoner was brought in. A tall man with a deep scar on his face. He claimed to be a captured smuggler, but Leila sensed something strange about him. When he asked too many questions about who she talked to or what she knew, she realized he was an informant sent by the commander. She pretended to be frightened and silent again, letting him believe she had given up. The next morning, that man was gone, and Leila knew she had narrowly escaped being exposed. Her small network of prisoners became her lifeline. They used subtle codes to share information. A folded piece of bread meant danger. A scratched mark on the floor meant Meeting tonight. The guards never noticed, thinking they were all too broken to resist. But inside, hope was growing. One night, Yusuf whispered through the wall, "Leila, I think I found something." He had seen a list of detainees left on an officer's desk. Names, dates, and numbers next to them. "They're not ID numbers," he said. "They're prices." Leila froze. Now she had confirmation. Commander Rashid was selling information, and perhaps people, to private contractors. The next morning, when the guards mocked her again, Leila just smiled faintly. They thought she had gone mad. But she was only stronger now. She had a mission, and she was no longer alone. Days later, during her next interrogation, Rashid tried to intimidate her again. "You can't win, Miss Anwar. No one will believe you even if you escape." She looked at him, calm and steady, and said quietly, "You're right. No one will believe me, but they'll believe your own words." Rashid frowned, not understanding. He didn't know her bracelet was recording every sound in that room. That night, back in her cell, Leila felt both fear and power. For the first time, she had the commander's voice captured. She had witnesses among prisoners, proof of his crimes, and the courage to keep going. The walls that once trapped her had now become her battlefield. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was fighting back in silence. Rashid still believed she was a helpless reporter lost in his system. But in truth, Leila had already started pulling the threads of his empire apart, one secret at a time. The days inside the Blacksite had started to blur together, but Leila could feel something changing. The guards were more tense, the commander more restless, and the prisoners could sense that something big was coming. Leila had been careful with every move, but deep down, she knew the danger was growing. She had collected enough proof, the names, the voices, and the files, but she still had no way to send them out. The bracelet with the microchip was still safe on her wrist, but one wrong move could expose everything. One morning, the guards came earlier than usual. They searched every cell, throwing things around, shouting at the prisoners. Leila sat quietly on her bed, pretending not to care. When they entered her room, one of them noticed her bracelet. "What's this?" he asked suspiciously. Leila tried to smile and said softly, "A gift from my mother." The guard looked at it for a moment, then laughed and said, "You think anyone cares about you here?" He snatched it off her wrist and left the room. As soon as the door closed, Leila's heart started racing. Her bracelet, the only evidence she had, was gone. She knew they would find the hidden microchip inside it. Within hours, chaos would follow. She pressed her hands against the wall, signaling Yusuf in panic. "They found it," she whispered. From the other side, Yusuf replied, "Stay calm. Don't show fear. Wait." That night, the Blacksite was quieter than usual. Too quiet. Leila could hear muffled voices from the corridor. Then heavy boots approached her cell. The door opened, and Commander Rashid stepped inside with two soldiers. He was holding her bracelet in his hand. "You've been busy, Miss Anwar," he said coldly. "You hid a memory chip in this? How clever." Leila didn't answer. Rashid threw the bracelet onto the floor. "Do you know what happens to people who spy on me?" he asked. His voice was calm, but his eyes burned with anger. "You think you're brave, but you're nothing without this toy." He crushed the bracelet under his boot. "Whatever you thought you had, it's gone now." For a moment, Leila felt her strength fade. The evidence, months of secret recordings and whispered testimonies, was destroyed. But then, she looked up and met his eyes. "You can destroy the bracelet," she said quietly, "but not what I've already sent." Rashid froze. "What did you say?" She smiled faintly. "Did you think I was foolish enough to keep everything here?" It was a lie. She hadn't sent anything. There was no signal, no contact with the outside world. But Rashid didn't know that. He stepped closer, his face pale with anger. "You're bluffing," he said. "Maybe," Leila replied. "But you don't sound so sure." That small sentence was enough to shake him. Rashid turned to his soldiers and ordered, "Move her out tonight. No records. No witnesses." The soldiers nodded. Leila understood exactly what that meant. Off record was another way of saying execution. She had only a few hours left. When they dragged her out of her cell that night, the other prisoners watched in silence. Some whispered prayers, others looked away. Leila didn't struggle. She walked calmly between the guards, her eyes sharp and alert. Every hallway, every door, she memorized them. If she survived this night, she would never forget. They put her in a small transport vehicle, handcuffed and blindfolded. The road was bumpy, and the engine roared through the darkness. She could hear one of the guards talking nervously. "Why now?" he asked. "The commander said she's dangerous," the other replied. "He wants her gone before morning." After what felt like hours, the vehicle suddenly stopped. There were voices outside, then gunfire in the distance. The guards panicked. "What's happening?" one shouted. Suddenly, the back door opened, and someone pulled her out. A hand covered her mouth. "Quiet!" a voice whispered. It was the young medic, the one who had once given her water. He cut her handcuffs and removed the blindfold. "There's no time," he said urgently. "They think you're dead. I swapped your papers. You need to go now." Leila stared at him in shock. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. The medic looked away. "Because what they're doing here is wrong. You have to make the world see it." He gave her a small bag with food, water, and a new bracelet. Inside it was a copy of the microchip he had secretly duplicated days before. "You made a copy?" she whispered. He nodded. "I couldn't let the truth die." Before she could thank him, he pushed her toward the trees. "Go," he said. "Run and don't look back." Leila turned one last time, but he was already walking toward the truck, ready to face whatever came next. Leila ran through the desert, her bare feet scraping against stones, her breath sharp and fast. The cold night wind hit her face, but she didn't stop. For the first time in weeks, she was outside those walls. Free but not safe. She looked at the bracelet on her wrist and whispered, "I'll finish what I started." Behind her, the Blacksite lights grew smaller and smaller, disappearing into the darkness. She didn't know where she was going, or if she'd make it out alive, but she carried something far stronger than fear, the truth. And she knew that one day, the world would hear her story. The desert stretched endlessly around her, silent and cruel. Leila ran until her legs felt like fire and her throat burned from thirst. The wind cut through her clothes, but she didn't stop. Every breath reminded her that she was still alive, something the commander never expected. The medic's words echoed in her head. "They think you're dead." That single thought gave her strength. She had a chance now, a small one, but enough. When the first light of dawn touched the horizon, Leila finally stopped to rest behind a group of rocks. She looked down at the new bracelet the medic had given her. Inside it was the microchip, a copy of the one she thought was lost forever. That tiny device now carried the truth of everything that happened inside the Blacksite. Her hands trembled as she whispered, "You didn't die for nothing," thinking about the medic who had risked everything to save her. For 2 days, Leila hid in the desert, moving only at night. She drank little water and ate almost nothing. Her body ached, but her mind stayed sharp. She knew the soldiers would soon realize the truth, that she wasn't dead, and when they did, they would hunt her. On the third night, she saw lights in the distance, small and flickering. A village. When she finally reached it, she collapsed near a well. 2 local women found her and took her to a small house. They didn't ask questions. They just gave her water and bread. Leila was too weak to speak much, but she managed to whisper, "Phone, I need a phone." One of the women nodded and brought her a small, old cell phone. With shaking fingers, Leila typed a message to her old editor back in Ankara. "Alive. I have proof. Division 9. Commander Rashid." Then she attached one small file from the microchip, a voice recording of Rashid's interrogation room, where he had spoken about controlling fear and people. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to make the world listen. When the message sent successfully, Leila felt tears fill her eyes. She had done it. She had escaped. The next morning, miles away in Ankara, Leila's editor, Kamal, opened his email and froze. The sender name made his heart stop, Leila Anwar. He played the recording again and again. There was no doubt. It was Commander Rashid's voice. Within hours, Kemal shared the file with trusted journalists and human rights groups. The story spread like wildfire. Headlines appeared everywhere. Whistleblower exposes secret prison network. Videos of Rashid's voice were played on international news channels. People started demanding answers. Governments denied involvement, of course, but the pressure kept growing. Inside the Blacksite, chaos erupted. Rashid smashed a glass against the wall when he saw the news. "She's alive!" he shouted at his officers. "Find her!" He ordered an immediate lockdown and blamed his soldiers for incompetence. But the truth had already escaped, just like Leila. Leila, meanwhile, stayed hidden in a safe house arranged by one of Kemal's contacts. Her body was still weak, but her mind was alive with determination. From that small room, she began to send the rest of the files from the microchip, videos of interrogations, prisoner lists, fake death certificates, and payment records. Every document revealed another piece of Rashid's corruption. Soon, journalists from all over the world started calling the story the Blacksite Files. Human rights groups demanded an investigation. Families of missing people came forward, recognizing names from Leila's list. Mothers cried on live TV, holding pictures of their sons who had disappeared years ago. Leila watched quietly from the corner of her small room, tears running down her face. She had done what she came to do. She had given the voiceless their voice back. But it wasn't over yet. Within days, foreign intelligence agencies launched an inquiry into Division 9. Soldiers who once served under Rashid started speaking anonymously. Some revealed how they had been ordered to erase prisoners. Others admitted they were paid to transport detainees to private contractors. Everything Leila had risked her life to prove was now coming to light. The more the truth spread, the more dangerous her situation became. Rashid had powerful connections, and he wasn't going down quietly. His men began searching villages near the border, offering money for information about a runaway woman. Leila had to move constantly, never staying in one place for more than a day. She wore a scarf over her face and traveled mostly at night. Every sound made her heart race, but she didn't stop. One night, as she sat by a fire with a group of nomads, she turned on a small radio. The voice of a news reporter filled the air. "Commander Rashid has been suspended pending investigation into human rights violations. Division 9 has been officially disbanded. Several officers have been arrested." Leila closed her eyes and smiled faintly. For the first time in a long time, she felt peace. She had done what she promised. The truth was finally out. But she also knew her fight wasn't truly over. There were still many people who had vanished without a trace, and their families deserved answers. She couldn't return home, not yet. There were still risks, still enemies watching. A few days later, she sent one final message to Kemal. "Keep the files safe. The story isn't finished." He replied simply, "Come home, Leila. The world needs you." She didn't answer. Instead, she turned off the phone and looked out at the endless desert. She had become a shadow, alive, but unseen. Her name was now a symbol of truth and courage. Months later, newspapers reported that the whistleblower behind the Division 9 exposure was still missing. Some believed she had escaped to another country under a false identity. Others thought she had been captured again. But those who truly understood her story believed something else. That Leila had chosen to stay hidden, continuing her work quietly, helping others expose the darkness she had once survived. And somewhere far from the noise of the cities, in a small tent under the stars, Leila listened to the radio one last time. Her story had become a voice of change. She whispered to herself, "The truth always finds a way." The woman who had been mocked, imprisoned, and left for dead had done the impossible. She had turned her pain into power, her silence into a storm that shook nations. And though the world still didn't know where she was, everyone knew her name. Leila Anwar, the journalist who exposed the commander's secret. The world was no longer silent about the Blacksite. Within days of Leila's files being leaked, the story had spread like wildfire. News anchors, newspapers, and online journalists were all talking about it. The videos and documents she had sent were impossible to deny. There were faces, names, signatures, and bank records. The truth was too detailed to be dismissed as fake. Commander Rashid, the man who once believed he was untouchable, suddenly found himself surrounded by cameras and questions. Governments tried to control the situation at first. They said the videos were under review, that the Blacksite was not officially recognized. But soon, too many people came forward. Families who had lost loved ones recognized their sons, daughters, and husbands in the leaked photos. The cries of those families filled the streets. Protests began outside government offices and military headquarters. "Where are they?" people shouted. "Who gave the orders?" The truth had escaped, and no one could cage it again. Inside the Blacksite, the atmosphere was different now. Guards looked nervous, and officers avoided eye contact. Some of them whispered about Leila, the woman they once laughed at, now the reason their world was collapsing. The same corridors that once echoed with screams were now filled with fear. Commander Rashid smashed his desk in anger when he saw his own face on the news. "Find her!" he yelled. But deep inside, he knew it was too late. The world already knew everything. Soon, international investigators arrived in the country. They demanded access to the Blacksite and questioned every officer they could find. Rashid tried to claim that he was following orders from higher authorities, but his subordinates betrayed him quickly to save themselves. They handed over documents, emails, and even phone recordings. Rashid's empire of lies began to crumble piece by piece. Meanwhile, Leila stayed hidden, moving between safe houses. She followed the news on a small radio. Every night she listened quietly, sometimes smiling, sometimes crying. The reporters didn't know her location, but they spoke her name with respect, the whistleblower who revealed the truth. Her story inspired journalists, activists, and ordinary people around the world. She had become a symbol of courage, even though she was still running for her life. When Rashid was finally arrested, the world watched live footage of him being taken away in handcuffs. He tried to cover his face, but the cameras caught his expression. The same cold eyes that once looked down on prisoners, now filled with fear. Leila listened to the report, her heart pounding. She whispered to herself, "Justice." It wasn't full justice, not yet, but it was a start. After Rashid's arrest, investigators opened the gates of the Blacksite for the first time. What they found shocked even the most experienced officers. Dark cells, torture devices, files of missing people, and unmarked graves nearby. Journalists broadcasted everything. The whole world saw the proof that Leila had risked her life to bring out. Survivors were freed, many of them too weak to walk, but they smiled when they stepped into sunlight. Some recognized Leila's voice from her time inside and asked, "Where is she? The woman who helped us?" No one knew. Some said she was hiding abroad. Others believed she was still nearby, watching silently. Kamal, her old editor, became one of the main voices in defending Leila's legacy. He refused to reveal her location and told reporters, "She gave everything for the truth. Let her live in peace." But secretly, he kept receiving short, encrypted emails from her. One said, "Keep pushing. There's more they're hiding." Another said, "Don't let them bury the story." He knew she was still alive, still fighting in her own quiet way. As months passed, the investigation grew bigger. More officers were arrested. Several governments were exposed for secretly funding the Blacksite operations. The story became an international scandal. News channels replayed clips of Leila's leaked videos over and over again. Every time people saw her face, that tired but determined look, they felt something powerful. Hope. Leila, though still in hiding, found small ways to continue her mission. She shared tips with other journalists under fake names, sent evidence to human rights lawyers, and used secure networks to spread information. Her courage gave others strength. Around the world, young reporters started calling her the ghost journalist, the woman who couldn't be silenced. But the fame also made her life harder. She couldn't use her real name anywhere, couldn't go back to her old home, couldn't see her family. Some nights, she felt a deep loneliness that almost broke her spirit. She missed simple things, sunlight through her window, tea with friends, her mother's voice. But whenever she felt weak, she remembered the faces of the prisoners who never made it out. That gave her the strength to keep going. A year after Rashid's arrest, a large international court held a public hearing. Survivors testified about the torture and corruption. Many mentioned Leila's name with tears in their eyes. One said, "She was our light in that darkness." The world listened. Rashid was found guilty of multiple crimes and sentenced to life in prison. When the judge announced the verdict, cameras flashed everywhere. It was a moment of justice, not only for Leila, but for every innocent person who had suffered in silence. That night, Kamal received one final message from an unknown email. It read, "It's done. Thank you for believing in me. The truth won. Goodbye." He never heard from her again. Years later, journalists still talk about her story. Documentaries and books were made, and human rights organizations created scholarships in her name. People who had never met her still spoke of her as if they knew her personally. She became a legend, the woman who was mocked, tortured, and left for dead, but who changed the world with nothing but her courage and her voice. No one ever found out where she went after that final message. Some said she started a new life far away. Others believed she continued working in secret, exposing corruption in other places. But no matter where she was, her story lived on. A reminder that even in the darkest prisons, truth can find a way to shine. And somewhere out there, maybe on a quiet night, Leila herself listened to the world's stories again. Stories of justice, bravery, and truth, and smiled softly, knowing she had been part of something much bigger than herself. Years passed, but the story of Leila Anwar never faded. Her name became a symbol, whispered in newsrooms, classrooms, and among human rights workers around the world. People who had never met her spoke of her with deep respect. Some called her the voice of the forgotten. Others called her the woman who exposed the commander's secret. But for many, she was simply a reminder that one person's courage could change everything. After the commander's trial and imprisonment, new governments and international groups promised reform. The Blacksite was shut down, and its dark halls were turned into a memorial for those who never returned. Visitors walked through the cold corridors where Leila once stood, reading the words she had written on a wall before escaping. "Truth lives, even in silence." Those words became famous, printed on banners and protest signs around the world. But Leila herself was gone. No one knew where she went after sending her last message to Kamal. Some believed she crossed into another country and changed her name to stay safe. Others thought she had been captured again or killed during her escape. But deep inside, many refused to believe she was gone. They said a person like her couldn't just disappear, that she was still out there helping others in the shadows. Kamal never stopped searching for her. He followed every lead, every rumor. Sometimes, he received mysterious letters with no return address. Short notes that said things like, "Keep fighting for them," or, "The truth doesn't end with one story." The handwriting looked familiar, and every time he saw it, his heart filled with hope. Meanwhile, her work continued to inspire new journalists. Young women studying journalism often mentioned Leila's name when asked who inspired them. One student said, "She taught us that being afraid doesn't mean you stop. It means you move forward anyway." Leila's bravery became part of journalism history, taught in universities as an example of truth-telling against impossible odds. A few years later, an international news agency released a documentary about her life. It was called The Woman They Laughed At. The film showed her journey, from her early days as a reporter to the moment she disappeared and the storm that followed. It included interviews with former prisoners who said, with tears in their eyes, "She gave us hope when we had none." When the documentary aired, millions watched it. People from all over the world sent messages of gratitude and sorrow. They said things like, "We owe her justice, and she changed the way we see courage." Governments that once denied the truth now had to face the world's questions. Memorials were built for the victims Leila had helped expose. Their families finally received recognition, and some even found peace after years of not knowing. All of this had happened because of one woman who refused to stay silent. But while the world moved on, there were still moments when people felt her presence. A reporter working on a new corruption case once received an anonymous email containing files, all neatly organized and titled, "For the Truth." Inside were documents that revealed another illegal operation, similar to Division 9. The reporter tried to trace the sender, but it led nowhere. At the bottom of the email, there was a single line, "Tell their stories." Many believed it was Leila's work again, her way of continuing the fight, even from the shadows. In one small town near the border, villagers sometimes spoke of a quiet woman who lived among them for a short time. She wore a scarf that covered her face, helped children learn to read, and spent long nights writing in notebooks. One day, she left suddenly, leaving behind only a bracelet made of leather. The same kind of bracelet Leila once wore. Whether it was really her or not, no one could say. But people liked to believe it was. As the years went by, her story turned into something larger than life. Not just a tale of survival, but of purpose. She had fought not for fame, but for truth. She had shown the world that even one person, when armed with courage and determination, could expose darkness that entire systems tried to hide. Kamal, now older and retired, often visited the memorial built in her honor. He would stand before her picture, a photograph of Leila smiling faintly, her eyes filled with determination. "You did it, Leila," he would whisper softly. "The truth won." He still believed she was alive somewhere, watching quietly, proud of what she had started. Her legacy continued to grow. Human rights awards were named after her. Scholarships for brave journalists were created in her memory. And in countries where freedom of speech was still at risk, people carried her name like a shield. Even though no one ever found her body, the world didn't need proof that she had existed. Her work, her courage, and the justice she brought were enough proof of her life. In every corner of the world where someone spoke the truth despite fear, a part of Leila lived on. Some stories fade with time, but Leila's didn't. Her voice, her bravery, and her belief that truth is stronger than fear became eternal. And though the desert winds had carried her away long ago, her words still echoed across the world. You can silence a person, but never the truth. Years after Leila's disappearance, her story continued to live in people's hearts. It had become more than just a story. It was now a movement, a symbol of truth and courage. But as time passed, new details began to appear, pieces of her life that no one had ever known. People started to wonder, what really happened to Leila after she vanished for the last time? One evening, a young journalist named Nadia was working in Ankara. She had grown up hearing about Leila Anwar, the fearless reporter who exposed Commander Rashid and the Blacksite. Nadia always felt a deep connection to her story. She had read every article, watched every documentary, and even visited the memorial once. But she always believed there was more to the story, something that hadn't been told yet. While researching another corruption case, Nadia received an anonymous envelope at her office. Inside, there was a small USB drive and a handwritten note that said, "Truth never dies. It only changes hands." Her heart raced. She plugged the USB into her computer, and what she saw left her frozen. There were folders full of documents, videos, and voice recordings, all labeled in the same neat handwriting Leila used in her notes. One video showed Leila, looking older but calm. She sat in a small room with plain walls, a faint smile on her face. "If you are watching this," she said softly, "it means my story continues. The truth is not mine alone. It belongs to everyone brave enough to speak it." Her voice was steady, filled with warmth and strength. Nadia couldn't believe what she was seeing. Could this mean Leila had been alive all these years, working from the shadows? The files contained shocking information, evidence of new secret operations run by people connected to the same corrupt network Rashid had once served. Leila had clearly kept investigating even after the world thought she was gone. She had collected names, locations, and transactions, enough to expose another hidden web of power and greed. Nadia realized that Leila hadn't disappeared. She had simply gone underground to continue her mission. Nadia knew she couldn't keep this to herself. She reached out to Kamal, Leila's old editor, who was now retired. When she showed him the video, his hands shook. Tears filled his eyes as he whispered, "I knew she wasn't gone." Together, they decided to publish Leila's final work, her unfinished investigation. But they also knew it was dangerous. If these files came from Leila, it meant the same people who once hunted her would come after them too. Before releasing anything, Nadia traced one of the locations mentioned in the files. It led her to a border village in another country, the same place where people once said a quiet woman had lived, teaching children. There, she found an old notebook in a small abandoned house. On the first page, written in fading ink, were Leila's words, "If one voice falls, another must rise." It was clear. Leila had passed her mission to the next generation, to people like Nadia. When the story was finally published, it shook the world once again. News headlines exploded with Leila's name. New files from whistleblower reveal more hidden crimes. Governments tried to deny the information, but the evidence was solid. The same pattern of corruption and silence had continued for years, and Leila had uncovered it long before anyone else. The public demanded justice again. Nadia's report brought a wave of change. New investigations started, more officials were arrested, and people once again spoke about truth and accountability. For many, it felt like Leila had returned, not in body, but in spirit. Her work was still changing the world, even years after she had disappeared. One night, after the story went global, Nadia received a short email from an unknown address. It said only one sentence: "You carried the light forward. Thank you." There was no name, no signature, but she didn't need one. She smiled through her tears. She knew who it was. Leila was alive. Somewhere far away, still watching, still guiding. Months later, a group of journalists gathered at the memorial built in her honor. They placed candles and flowers near her photograph. Someone read aloud one of her quotes, "Even if I disappear, the truth will not." The crowd stood in silence, the flames flickering gently in the night. Among them stood Nadia, holding Leila's old notebook close to her chest. Leila's story had come full circle. She had started as one brave woman fighting for truth inside a dark prison, and her courage had inspired an entire generation to continue her fight. The commander's Blacksite was long gone, but her light still burned in the hearts of those who refused to stay silent. In the end, no one ever truly confirmed what happened to Leila. Some said she died in the desert. Others believed she lived quietly under a new name. But one thing was certain: she never stopped fighting for the truth. And in every newsroom, every protest, and every story told in her name, her spirit lived on. Leila Anwar had become more than a journalist. She had become a legend, proof that even one voice, when brave enough, can echo forever.